Good morning, guys. Today let us maybe pass through, or let us maybe see how we manage states with on Next.js. So with that said, I'm going to open my terminal here. I'm going to npx create next can maybe increase the size, increase view, zoom in that way. npx create next app at latest. The name of the app will be states management. Of course, we are going to work with TypeScript. I'm not interested with using ESLint. I'm interested with the Tailwind. I'm not interested with the src directory. I'm interested with uprooter. I'm interested with Pack for compiling. Would you like to customize the import alias? No, I'm not interested. Let us give it a minute so that it can install these dependencies. Then you can start maybe working. Meanwhile, as it is installing, can maybe take a look on. Okay, it's already installed. So you are going to cd states management. Then I'm going to open this one with the VS Code. Then after opening, I'm going to do what? I'm going to run the application with npm run dev. And after I've run, I'm going to reduce I'm going to zoom out again. No, let's zoom in that way. Now with that one set, I can open now this application with the code with the Munyao here. Say localhost 3000. While it's being loaded here, it's compiling, and as it's compiling, it has already finished compiling. So with that said, we can do this. I can now come here and maybe we can pass through the directory before maybe we start exploring state management. Now, when I open this app here, this one is like the entry file to our next application, and here we have something like we have these various kind of files. We have globals.css, we have layout.txt, tsx, we have page. Now this page you see here is what is being displayed here. Is this. First of all, let us dismantle the styling, and we can say globals here. Here you can change the globals. You can alter everything. Then I can maybe put some maybe custom padding, the 0 box sizing, border box that way. See, now I can now come and see this layout here. This is the file that everything, maybe there are some components that you want to be shared in different pages. You can maybe define a layout txt like this. Now, if maybe you are building a dashboard and maybe you have some navbar or sidebar that you want to be shareable, it is now where you define at layout. If I open here, I'm not interested with these fonts here from Google. I can maybe remove them like that. Then I can maybe remove this class name here so that it may not remove errors. Then I can change the topic of this, and I say states management that way. I can remove these unnecessary imports here. Well, that one has no issues. And when I have done that, see, it's working. Then there's this page here. I said that this is what is being displayed here. But I can reduce this. I can reduce it. Let's reduce it. I can, okay, that one is okay. I can maybe remove this like that. Then I put RFCE. And for that we remove. I rename, copy everything, and I rename to home like that. It will display by default, and we have our home there. So we have already set up what we want, maybe want to work with. Before we start doing state management, it's more better we understand what do we have to do state management. Now, maybe you have a page like this, and there is data that is changing across this page. For that reason, because that level of state management is still minimalistic, you can use something like useState. When maybe the kind of states you are dealing with, maybe they are in one component or they are in one page, you can maybe use useState. And maybe we can explore how that one works. And before we can maybe do that, we can maybe do some little styling. We say h is equals to h screen, then width is equals to full. Then of course we need it to be flex. Then we need flex direct. I want it to be column. Then justify content center, items center. Then you give it a minute, it's there. Then now we do this. I have this. I can maybe define something like h2, and I call it counter is equals to 0. Then I can now say this as a class name of maybe text5xl, then it has font semi-bold. That way. Yes, that way. Then I can maybe come up with another div here whereby I'm going to define some various buttons. Then I can give it a class name of uppercase. Then I want it to be, maybe I can just say increment here. Then I wanted it to have BG of rows 500. Then of course I want padding X of maybe 2 rem. Then padding Y I want it to have 0.5 rem. Then I want it to have text to white. Then rounded, I want it to be medium. That way. Let us have some maybe space in here. I can give it a margin top of 2 rem. Let's say 3 rem, so that it can be a little bit spacey. Then I can now display this button here. Can copy it, paste it there. This one will be decrement. That way. Now this one, we can maybe give it a flex, and I give it a gap of 2 rem. That one said it's okay. Now with that one, we can maybe explore the basics first. So we have something like const counter, set counter is equals to useState. When I do that, this will automatically fail to work, because by default every component in Next.js is a server-side component. So for us to be able to use the useStates, these React hooks, we have to change this component to be a client component, and for that we use client. Now with that one set, we can maybe change this counter here. We want to give it maybe value dynamically, say counter there. Now we need to mess with this value. Let's define some two functions. Const decrement is equals to const decrement is equals to set counter and counter subtract -1, then const increment is equals to set counter +1, that way. Now with that one set, I can maybe come here and maybe call this here on click is equals to increment counter, it's okay. Then I can say on click equals to decrement that way. And that one with the set, it's working. That one is 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 working. Now maybe we want to pass this data to another component. How do we do that? Maybe we can have another component. You can maybe click outside, then create a folder called components there. And these components, I can have a component called, and mind you, this component you should name it with capital letter. So display.tx. Then I do this. With that one done, I can maybe come here and I call what? I call this import display that way, there. When I import it, it will automatically be fetched from the components. Then I can come here and I do what? A display, that way. With that one display, its set is already here. But you see, I wanted to demonstrate, if you come here and name it, maybe you can call me and call it, display that way. And I open my pages, and I open here, maybe I call it here, I come here, I call it display that way. And I come here and I remove this, and I remove this, and I maybe say import display, and I use here the display. You see, this one has highlighted errors because we have used this one in the small letters, this component. So we have to rename it the way it was. Can maybe change it the way it was, that way, the way it was that way. Then I can now come and change this one to display and call it supposed to be display. Then maybe you can give this one a margin class, margin top, can give it maybe a 2rem. Now let's say we are interested with the, what are we interested with? We are interested with, let's say, that one is working properly. Let's say we want to pass this counter here to be displayed bottom here, or we can maybe say, we can say what? I can say page. This page, I can maybe bring this here. Can bring it here on top. That way. You see? Then I have this. Then I copy this. Then I open this one and I display it here. That way. But this one has not already been imported, so I can maybe put there 0. You see, when you have something like this, Has it really been? Okay, when you have something like this and you want to pass this data from here to here, we want to pass this data from this page here to this component, we use something called the props. And you see, you will, as we go on, you will see the where props can never work and where props can work. So this counter here, we want it to be displayed inside this component so that it can be displayed here. So what we are going to do, we are going to say counter is equals to counter, that way. But you see this counter here, we have not yet defined it in this component, display component. So we have our display there, we have our counter here, we have our counter there, and is equals to counter, that way. But you see, this one is giving us errors because we have not defined the type of this. So we have to define this type here, and we say counter should be number, like that. And when we have done that, it's wrong. And say number. Supposed to be counter. It's a number. I don't know why it's not. Let's give it any. So this counter here, you see, we have given this counter. We have given this counter maybe a type of any. Okay. Now, if I increment, you see this data. This data is being passed from. You see that data is being passed from this page here to this component. That data, this data is being passed here to this. Now, imagine you are passing a lot of data, so you end up defining your stuff here, defining your stuff in this component, and that one causes something we call proxy drilling, whereby you find out that a lot of components are passing data through themselves, and you might find out that your application has reached to a particular point whereby your application is no longer manageable. So for that reason, it is good when you have your data maybe in a particular store, whereby in that store your data can be used across the application entirely across the application. So instead of maybe using this way, using these props, we can come up with our own store. Maybe we can come and define the store somewhere here. And with that store, we can use that data anywhere we want in that application. So how do we do that? It's very simple. Let us see how we can maybe define our store, whereby you can access the data from this page, and also you can access the data from the display, so that we can maybe be avoiding props drilling. But when we are dealing with minimalistic states management, maybe you are just managing some little stuff, you can as well as work with the use states. But with that one, we can do this. We can maybe do this. We can now define our own store, whereby every state whereby our data is in that store, and we can access it from any point of our application. How do we do that? We use something we call, there are different libraries that are used to do that kind of implementation. But for our own case here, we are going to use a Redux Toolkit. We are going to use a Redux Toolkit, and I'm going to install it. I'm going to install it here. So how do I install it? States management, npm install at Redux, npm install at Redux.js toolkit React Redux. I'm going to be a little bit quicker. Then with that one set, I have already installed it. So what will now happen is I will now close this, close this component, and I will create another component here outside, and I'll call it store. Now this store is now going to host, is now going to hold everything, every data we'll be using across the application. So in this store, I'm going to create another folder. I call it features. And I'm going to create a file. I call it store, store.ts. These features here should be having features. Yeah, it's okay. Now with this store, I'm going to define something we call a store there. I'm going to define a store whereby this store is going to host our data. So I'm going to import configure from, let's say, from Redux Toolkit, like that. Then here I'm going to say const store is equals to configure store. Configure store is going to import itself. Configure store. Then this configure store, it holds one large reducer. And this reducer is comprised of other reducers. So it's reducer. Now this reducer here, it is comprised of other reducers. Now with that one set, I can now say export default. Export the default store, like that. Now this store, when I define this store, it simply means this store can be accessed from anywhere in the application. So how do we do that here? How do we want to configure our data, we want to put our data. How do we do that? We come up with something we call slices. Now, here, let us come up with a slice, one slice. Maybe let us work with this counter here, but at a global perspective. So these features here, I can say slice, I call it counter slice .ts. Counter slice.ts, that way. A minute. Counter slice.ts. I was texting somebody here. Then with this, I can maybe import create slice. Can import a create slice there. Then here with our create slice, you can say const counter slice is equals to create slice is equals to create slice name. What will be the name? The name will be count. Then this one will receive something called initial state. I will define that one. I will show you how to do that. Then it will be receiving something called reducers. Now, this counter slice receives three options. It receives, that one is the basic implementation. It receives the name of the counter slice. Because this counter slice, we have to store it at the store.ts. Then it receives initial state, and then it receives reducers. But you see, this initial state, we have not yet defined this initial state. This initial state is the initial state of what we want to work with of our data. What is the state of that data? So const initial state, initial state is equals to our initial state there is equals to count is equals to 0. Counter, or let's say counter is equals to 0 there. But now we need to be able to increase the value of the counter, and we also need to be able to reduce the value of the counter. So how do we do that? We do it very simply. We do this. Here at the reducers, we define various methods to do what? To do the manipulation of our states. So we need a method called decrement that way. Then this decrement is going to return. We want this decrement to be able to alter this value and to be able to decrease the value of the counter. So this decrement is going to receive a state. And now we are decrementing this value. So what are we going to do? We are going to state.counter is equals to minus is equals to 1. By that one, we have decremented this value. Then we can now come here and say, because we want also to be able to increase, you can say, you can maybe put a comma there and say increment. Let's say, let's maybe use a very good definition way, counter. Then I can put it there, state. So state.counter plus is equals to 1, that way. Then with this one set, we cannot use our slides here unless we first export them. These reducers, it is what we are going to use to access them in somewhere like page that we can use to alter the value of this counter. So how are we going to achieve that? It's very simple. We are going to say export const decrement counter increment counter is equals to counter slice dot actions, that way. Then I'm going to export the default counter slice. With this counter slice being exported here, I can now come here with the name of this counter here, can copy that name. Then I come here to my store and I say, I have a reducer called counter. And this counter, it is from somewhere we call counter slice. Now I'm going to say counter slice dot reducer, that way. You see? That way. Supposed to be a comma. You put it that way. Then with this store set now, we need now to use our store in our application. But you see, we cannot use it that way. We have to configure it. Now, this type of Next.js we have installed, this type of app of Next.js we have installed, we have an entry folder here, and this entry folder is different from, you see, Next 15 came up with the src directory, whereby it has an entry file to our application, like it is in the React application, whereby you have something like index.txt. When I'm using Vite, we have something like main.txt. But now here we don't have app, we don't have this file here, app.ts, somewhere, and a file like that. So how do we do that? So here we come here to the layout. This layout, we configure something we call provider. We configure something we call provider, so that provider will now give us access into entire application and we can use our store. But you see that provider is very, when maybe you are using something like create a React app, we can configure that provider at index.js. But here we use a layout. the layout component, it will not work, and I will explain why. If I import provider from React Redux, that way, import provider from React Redux, then here I say provider like that, and I bring these children because I want them to be rendered. So what happens, this one is an I order component, then we put it there, then I say maybe store is equals to, now I import my store, import store, import store, then I now configure my store there. You see, I want to explain something. It will not work. It will not work. It will not work because by default, this layout.txt, it is a server-side component. It is a server-side component, and we cannot now. We cannot now come here and say use client. It cannot work here because of issues like this, issues like metadata. This one is the entry file to the entire Next application. So how do we do that? And we want to put our provider. How do we do that? So what I do, I remove this and I remove this. Then I also remove this here. And I remove this here. So how do we do that? And I want to I want to use my store. So what I do is I come here to store, then I put a file. I define a file called providers.ts like that. Now these providers, I say export const export function, export const providers, export default const providers. Then this is going to return something. Going to return, it's going to return export default. Let's use this way, export default function providers. Oh, I've known the reason. It is because here we supposed to be sorry, I've been in the world of Angular so long, so I've been it's long I've been touched in Next.js, but so it's supposed to be that way. It was because this one, it was not in a JSX format. So with this one set, I come now here and I say I want to import provider. Then I'm going to import provider from React Redux. Import provider from React Redux. Then I'm going to say import store from store. Now this one I'm going to return what? Provider. That provider. I'm going to return this provider here. Then here I'm going to define the children there. Then for here I'm going to put it as store. This store is equals to our store there. That way. The store is equals to our store. But you see here there is typing issues. Children is declared, but its value is never read. So how do we do this? We have to configure these typing issues, and we say children. We say what? Children say children react dot, say children react node. It is always good to give it is always good to give the correct typings so that then here I can maybe come and say children. Maybe come and say children. It's been long I haven't touched Next.js. It's only that I've decided to be serious with it. So this I'm going to import. I'm going to import it here on layout component. I'm going to import providers. And I've imported these providers. So I'm going to define here providers like that. And this one is going to receive the children. Now, I want to explain something. These providers here is acting as an awk. What is an awk? Awk is an high order component. This is a component that receive another component as a child or as a prop. So with that one set, we can maybe come and check whether our application is running. Maybe restart it again. Where is this error? Then I can now come here to this provider. These providers here, can change it to something like, can convert it to use client into a server-side component, to a client component. Then with that one set, it's now working. So you have to understand properly client component and server-side component. So with that one set, we can maybe use now our counter. We can maybe use our counter here. So I can maybe come to our function here, display that. Then I import. You see this counter here. I can now pass the counter directly from our store. If I import our page here, if I open our page there, I want to remove this. I want to remove that. And I also want to remove this. And I want also to do what? I want to comment this, and I want to comment this. And because this one is highlighting some errors, it's because of this here, this counter here. Now, I want us to use now, to work with a store. To work with a store. Let us now work with the store. You see, nothing will now happen. Nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. But this display here, I can maybe come and say, can import use selector from React Redux. And I can now open the store here, store. Then with this store, I can now target this counter and say const counter is equals to use selector state.counter. This counter here is the name of our reducer here in the store. Then in that counter now I access counter. You see, that way. But here there is typing issues. But because of maybe I want let's just work with any, then I will explain how this one affect. How it's dangerous to use something like any. Because when you are using any in your application, why do you have to work with a TypeScript if you are using any? Basically TypeScript is good in typings. So if you are using any, your code has no difference with JavaScript. But let us just use any for the moment, and we'll pass through the code again now, changing the any's change the any's to proper typings. Then I can now come here and I put counter. Now, with that one set, you see our counter has been instantiated, this counter. Now, let us work with this increment and decrement. From now working with our store to alter this. Working with our store now to alter this. Now, if I come now here to page, and I open, I say import, and I import here, I open counter slice that way. I want now to import this decrement and increment. I say import decrement counter, increment counter, that way. With that one set, what do I now do? I want to import something called use dispatch. Import use dispatch, that way. That one set, I come now here and I define const dispatch is equals to use dispatch, that way. With that one set, I now come here and in my increment, I say, in my increment, I say, I want to return a function, then I say what? Then I say dispatch what? I want to dispatch this increment counter, that way, as any, supposed to be increment counter, that way. Then with this one, I'm going to uncomment, and I'm going to say, I'm going to return a function. I'm going to say dispatch decrement counter, that way. And this one, with this one set, you are now way to go, and it will work. Your application will work properly. Your application will work properly. Just like that, just like that. So that's how you do it. That's how you do it. I wanted to say something about this slice here, this counter slice. I wanted to say something about, there are different ways to access this, but I like using this display. You can define it there. You can define the exports, these selectors from a slice, and pull them from there. But I like using use selector. But now you have to know. I wanted to explain something about this any. This any here. This any here, you see, the problem with putting this kind of coding, using this kind of typings, is because this kind of any, it simply means this state can receive any kind of data. It's any kind of type. And you see, with this kind of typings, you find out that developers are working with a large code base, and it becomes very hard to maintain the code, to read the code, and to know. They may fail also to, it also brings issue with understanding proper typings. So this any here, I can maybe define I can define this type from the store. I can define this type from the store. I can define this type from the store. And how am I going to define it? It's very simple. It's very simple. How am I going to define it? I'm going to say export root state, export const root state, export const root state is equal to return type export, supposed to be, I'm doing a lot of mistakes. I've been away from Next for long. Type of store, this our store there, then you get the state, and then we close it. what is happening is we are getting the type of this root, we are getting the type of our store. So I'm going now to say export type. Now with that one set is okay, but because I wanted to define a state for maybe for the dispatch, but we are not dispatching any data. So we can maybe work with, we are just dispatching a function. So I can maybe work with this root state. So I can now come here to display and I import a root state. And I have imported root state. Can now come and say these are state there, same as root state. And that one is proper typing. And then you can now see it's working correctly. So if maybe you are interested with maybe the code, I'm going to push to my GitHub account, and I will portray the link there so that maybe you can download the code and you can use it for your learning. I wanted to demonstrate how you can use, maybe if I come here and I open, let me open it my another account here. If I come here and I open something like JSON placeholder, now think about this. There's this data here from JSON placeholder. There is this data. This one is an API, maybe a dummy API to work with. Think about this scenario. You are pulling some blocks from, you are adding a certain API to pull some blocks from the backend. And maybe you want those blocks to be, when someone clicks one single block, it can maybe be redirected to another page whereby you can study more stuff about the blog. At that point, you can maybe opt to store that data in a store. So I wanted to basically now demonstrate how to work with something we call create async thunk, so that you can maybe be interacting with the APIs. That's one maybe a little bit high level states management way. But there is a meeting I wanted to attend, and because of time, I may opt to do that some other time. So I will create another video explaining how to do state management using APIs, how to maneuver APIs, to configure APIs, and maybe when you want to store users' data, you want maybe to send your users data to store, I will create a video explaining that. But because of time, I will portray the link whereby you can get this project. Meanwhile, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this, so that you can keep on growing and growing. So thank you. Enjoy your day.